Hello economics students. In this dot point, VCEE is telling you they want you to understand the consequences of not achieving the goal of strong and sustainable economic growth and the impacts of not achieving the goal on living standards. And this is including if we are growing too fast, we're going to put pressure on our environment, our external sector, and inflation, which of course we've already talked about, but we're going to go through specifically. And if it's too low, well, we're going to have high unemployment. So let's go through them. Now, if growth is too high, obviously, if we're growing our economy too fast, there's going to be an environmental impact. The production of goods and services will always impact the environment. But just to give you a couple of examples, our big mining industries in Queensland, New South Wales and Western Australia that provide so much income and jobs for the Australian economy, but they have an impact on our environment. First of all, once you dig up these common access resources, then they're gone. So there are limited supply of these resources. Secondly, the mining destroys culturally significant sites for our First Nations people. Mining in general uses lots of chemicals which can destroy native environments. They have to cut down forests. They have to use lots of energy, lots of fuel, which impacts climate change. So use your imagination. You can think about how the production of anything in an economy, if you do lots of production, it's going to have an impact on the environment. Even deeper, the use of energy will lead to climate uncertainty and climate change, which we're going to come back to at the very end of this VCE course. So we're going to think, what's the impact on material living standards? What's the impact on non-material living standards? And of course, in both those examples, they are negative impacts. All right, this external sector, again, we're going to come back to this in outcome 3. But remember, we don't want to spend too much money overseas. We don't want too many leakages from that circular flow model into external economies. We do rely heavily on imports and technology. We actually import a lot of medicine and cars into Australia. If we do too much of that, it can lead to what we call a current account deficit. And that just means more money is leaving Australia than is coming into it. And that will flow on to creating debt for the Australian economy. But we'll talk way more about this in outcome 3. And when I say debt, I mean foreign debt or net foreign debt. Now, how would this impact material living standards? Well, if you rely too heavily overseas on imports, that would slow down the Australian economy and that would slow down industry in Australia. It might even destroy some certain industries in Australia, and that would be bad for material living standards and non-material living standards. You could make an argument that access to overseas goods and services improves non-material living standards, but I'd keep to the standard and say that's bad. Finally, the most obvious one is if we're growing too fast, we're going to put pressure on prices. In 2023, which is now, the Australian economy is experiencing significantly high inflation, and that's because we grew way too fast out of our COVID recession. We put way too much pressure on our economy, and when that happens, prices start to rise. Basically, there was too much money chasing too few goods and services. Or in more specific language, the economy was operating way too close to capacity. Unemployment was low. There wasn't a lot of labor around. So to attract employees to their businesses, higher wages were paid. And then those higher wages had to be passed on to consumers in the form of higher prices. And we're going to talk more about inflation when we talk about that goal. But if you produce too much and you get too close to a capacity of the economy, high inflation will deteriorate or decrease material living standards and decrease non-material living standards. Finally, the opposite, if you're not achieving, or you're growing too slow, so you're not achieving strong growth, maybe it's sustainable, but it's not strong enough. Well, we know that one person's spending in an economy is another person's job. If we think back to the circular flow model, production creates a derived demand for labor. And if the economy is not growing at that 3 to 3.5% magical real GDP rate, we're not going to create enough jobs, and the unemployment rate may grow. That's bad for material and non-material living standards. All right, so that's strong and sustainable economic growth. Bye for now.